What's up, friends, and welcome into Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Chris Welsh, and today we got a great topic. Future, the way future, 2025 first round projecting. That's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at who belongs in that first round. But I ain't doing it. Who's joining me? The great and powerful Pat Fitzmaurice, of course, my all-season ranks buddy, and one of my best friends in the industry. I have known him forever. He has always been a dear friend, doing great things for me, and now I get to direct and be very bossy to him. It is the Athletics' own Jake Ciely, the all-in kid. Jake, what's up, buddy?
What's going on? It's been too long. I know you started that off, and I'm like, wait, is there another guest I don't know coming in?
Well, Jake and I have shared gelato together in
gelato.
person. Yeah.
I knew you were going to bring up the gelato.
Of course, we shared gelato. We went to the Royal Rumble together. We have a long story history. We did a show for 2 years together. So I'm very excited to do it because I have done ranks conversations with you for years, and Pat and I spent the entire season doing ranks, which, by the way, Pat, let's give a shout out just for 1 second. The ranks contest that just finished up, I believe, if I remember correctly, top 25? Was it top 20? I don't want to undersell you. I believe you finished inside the top 25 of the overall, maybe the top 20.
20th.
Oh,
thank you.
That's beautiful. I will tell you, second best week I had was stupid week 17. We just got the accuracy results. I finished 19th. I finished 19th in it. And
that's a good thing though, because that's when it counts the most.
That's what I think. Here's also my biggest like excitement. I finished one spot ahead of Derek Brown this year. So no big deal. Just want to put out the King of Bros is going to have to sit one spot behind me in the in-season ranks. But we're not here to talk about this season. We're here to talk about next season. That's what we're going to be doing here. The 2025 first round, it's already going to be crazy. We have got both of your guys' projected first round. We're going to go through them, talk through some of the debates. There's some big ones, just as a preview. Can we see a tight end back in the first round? Is there a rookie that's viable there? And who is the standout? Are there any standouts from last year that don't belong or that are going to jump in? Those are the questions that we're going to be asking in this episode. But make sure that you guys are dialed in with us all off season long, because just because football is starting to end, as you can tell, we're already looking to next year. We've already got, I think, some early ranks in, draft ranks we're looking at. Dynasty shows are back in tune. So make sure you're locked in over at Fantasy Pros. You can always download my playbook. Drafting is going to be here. Next thing you know it, we got you covered. And make sure you're subscribed here, right here on the channel, the YouTube channel, and the podcast for Fantasy Pros. Gentlemen, let's project the 2025 first round. And you two are boring. You both went chalk with your first two picks. You guys went with the same two. You've got at number one, Jahmyr Chase. Shout out to Andrew Erickson, who's been pounding that Jahmyr Chase table all season long. Saquon Barkley comes in at 2. You guys both agree with this at 1 and 2. A wide receiver, a running back that is not named Christian McCaffrey. So here's the question. And Jake, let's start with you on this one as our studious guest here. Are these the definitive 1 and 2? Is it Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Chase, maybe in some type of an order if someone wanted to have the running back at the top? Do you think this is the no doubt top 2 picks? And is the order interchangeable?
Yeah, I think it's slightly interchangeable. If you feel more comfortable taking a running back, it's similar to what we had into this season, which isn't going to sound good when I say it, but it was Christian McCaffrey or Tyreek Hill or Justin Jefferson as the first pick type of conversation. And of course, most of those didn't work out as the number 1 pick. Justin Jefferson was a first rounder, but not the number 1 pick. But I think it's interchangeable if you want to take the running back. The thing here is that we have the best season since the rookie season for Barkley. We have Jahmyr Chase, which I'll give him the slight edge. And this is coming from, as you know, and everybody listening knows, my dog is named Barkley. So I'm a huge fan of Barkley. But the difference is they both put up similar numbers, whereas Chase might have a few, maybe 1 or 2 more games where he hits single digits. The difference is he also has multiple 30-point games. Barkley gets close a couple times, but those big ones that kind of carry your entire team are going to come more often from Chase than they will Barkley, just because of who he is. And I think this stands whether or not T. Higgins is back. If Higgins is back, cool. It's the Chase we've always known. If he's not and they replace him with somebody else, maybe even to a lesser degree, maybe even more volume for Chase. So I have no problem if you want Barkley first to go to the running back route. But I think it's these two and then a tier drop off to everybody else we're going to be talking about.
The running back, not the dog, clearly.
Yes.
Clearly. Okay.
Yes.
Just so everybody was clear, this is the running back, not the dog. Pat, what do you think about this? Definitive 1 and 2, and is it interchangeable?
Well, if it were a league with only 2 starting wide receivers, I think I'd bump Barkley up to number 1. I'm doing this based on a start 3 wide receiver league, but Andrew Erickson pointed out on our awards podcast the other day, smart guy, by the way, that it feels like maybe 2024 was the year to draft Saquon Barkley, and he kind of rightly pointed out that seasons like the one Barkley just had have a way of not repeating. So many times during the season when people ask me start-sit questions involving some player who was a one-week wonder, I'll tell them not to chase last week's points. And I think it's fair to wonder if taking Barkley 101 or 102 in 2025 is a case of chasing last year's points. Like, look, Barkley is great. His offensive line is great, probably will continue to be great. But I do wonder if it might make more sense to draft like an ascendant talent, Bijan Robinson, whose best seasons are probably still ahead of him, over a guy like Barkley, who may have just had his peak year. So to me, there's really not much separation at all between Saquon Barkley and Bijan Robinson. And I might actually flip Bijan Robinson ahead of Barkley at some point. Not sure about that, but he does look pretty foolproof right now. But again, these things have a way of not repeating.
Well, and that's going to lead to a really good question. But you know, what's interesting is you were kind of talking about that. It leads to another thing that pops up for me in that, it's like definitive Ja'Marr Chase. We just also experienced a year where I do want to give credit to the wide receivers, those top end wide receivers. I mean, Tyreek Hill was a big, massive failure, but Chase, Justin Jefferson, kind of what wide receivers always do. They're up. But running backs, we saw so many people wanting to fade running backs. You kind of felt the weight of not having depth at running back, or if you avoided those top end running backs, you felt that into the playoffs. I mean, you might have more than ever. When we get those stats of like championship teams, you might have more than ever the Derrick Henrys and the Saquon Barkleys, the top backs, and not those lower guys. That it kind of shoves in your face a little bit more why running backs could potentially be a little bit more valuable, especially maybe the elite ones. Jake, do you think we should carry anything of what the depth of the running back position was? Maybe the pseudo, I don't want to call it like a complete failure of zero running back, because it always it can work out, but we felt the weight of what we lost at running back this year, and people might want to push those up. Do you think that maybe justifies pushing up guys like Saquon Barkley, like Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, those type of guys that we're going to talk about?
So my first, and if I think about my second round, are pretty similar to last year. And there's not going to be many more running backs. And the big advantage for last year was the value in Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry at the end of the first round. And I'll just straight liken it to the actual NFL and free agency. We just saw the anomalous year for free agent running backs. Is we're not going to see Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, and Saquon Barkley in free agency again this year. It's going to be a downturn. We're probably not going to see a ton of years where 60-70% of the top 12 running backs stay 100% healthy for the entire year and play 16-17 games. So it's kind of an anomalous year, but that doesn't mean the strategy really changes. I still have some smattering of running backs in the first round. The values of the second round running backs are still RB1s, but I'm going to keep them there. I'm just going to keep my strategy very much the same. And you kind of get that benefit of the ones that might be in the second round this year might be some of the ones that pop back inside the top 5 next season, just because of how certain things shake out. So I think that, yes, you felt it, and you can always play, you kind of alluded to it, you can play the hindsight of like, sure, a zero running back worked if you got Chase Brown and Bucky Irving and Rico Dowdle. And it's like, yeah, how many teams hit on all 3? How many teams were able to do that playing zero RB? It was very few and far between. I think the biggest thing here is understanding that there is still value with the top tier of running backs, but I feel like that's always been the case. It's just this year happened to be a little anomalous with how many stayed healthy.
Yeah, and it might be fair, Pat, this is a really great point that Jake makes. It might be fair when we do assess this that it's not necessarily about overvaluing running backs early on, than it is being like, hey, cool that we did I'm going to do a running back round 1, wide receiver in the first round, the second round, the third round. Maybe in the second round, there's going to be incredible running back value this year, that we need to be a little bit more balanced through our first 4 or 5 picks and what we have at running back than it is shoving running backs ahead of wide receivers. Do you think that's kind of fair?
I think it is fair. And boy, when you look at the second round, remember what a minefield the second round looked like in 2024 drafts. And for 2025, the second round looks fabulous. It's a candy store. So kind of a night and day difference there. I know we're supposed to be focusing on the first round in this show, but yeah, I mean, like Jake's point about the injuries is a really good one. It was almost eerie how few running back injuries we had this year, especially in the first 10 weeks of the season. I mean, it was Isaiah Pacheco and I really can't remember another significant running back injury. And normally the injury rates at running back, McCaffrey, although he was,
I remember
week one, technically.
One hurt.
Do we count that? Like that was damaged goods coming into the season. But and generally, I mean, I think injury rates tend to be higher at running back than they are at wide receiver, and it was just totally flipped on its head this year.
No, that's like and that's totally what you take with it. Like the safety of wide receiver. I mean, Tyreek Hill again did fail us, but for the most part, injuries kind of like fading a little bit on wide receivers. Like they are safer with the huge upside, but there were so many running backs that was attached to, oh, Henry's getting older. That was everybody's argument about Saquon. They're like, okay, he always gets hurt. Like, yeah, he's going with a better team, better offense. Everything should smash for a great year, but he always gets hurt. And that's why people talk themselves out of it. And there were so many that were healthy. Things are going to start to get different. You guys are not going to start agreeing, and it's going to happen with the next pick. But first, let's talk about our friends over at DraftKings, because NFL playoffs? Are we talking about NFL playoffs? You bet we are. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Scoring touchdowns is key to winning in the NFL playoffs. Duh. And the key to you scoring big is betting on them at DraftKings, the number one place to bet touchdowns. If you're ready to place your first bet some touchdowns today. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. How about this? Mark Andrews has scored a touchdown in 6 straight games, including against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Well, guess what? Going up against the Steelers this weekend, no Zay Flowers, and Andrews is plus 155 for an anytime touchdown. And here's another reason to watch your favorite players crush it in the playoffs. New customers bet $5, going to get 200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big during the NFL playoffs with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FantasyPros. That's code FantasyPros for new customers to get 200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5 only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. These two players are not the same. Coming in at pick 3 projecting for 2025, we've got Pat's own Bijan Robinson and Puka Nacua for you, Jake. So these are great. Pat, you alluded to Bijan Robinson jumping up, maybe even above Saquon Barkley. And really what I'm curious about is like 2 running backs in the first 3 picks. I don't remember the last time anybody, especially a prominent name like you in the industry, was comfortable with that. I don't feel like people are comfortable with that. So what do you think alters outside of what we saw in 2025? Like, what do you think is so deserving of 2 running backs being inside your top 3? And I think you've already kind of alluded to what the gap between these 2 is. It's very minimal because you might jump them, but 2 running backs inside your top 3 is quite a statement, Pat, which I love, by the way, as a running back guy.
Yeah, I mean, just how good these guys are. Saquon has always been immensely talented, and we saw him dropped into the perfect situation with the Eagles in 2024. And Bijan, pretty incredible in his own right. 15 touchdowns, almost 1,900 yards from scrimmage this season. And it still kind of feels like there's meat left on the bone. Like the way Bijan patiently sets up blocks and waits for holes to open up reminds me so much of peak Le'Veon Bell, except Bijan is much faster and more explosive than Bell was. So, and it is, there's some other guys we like and I think are worthy of first round picks, but like Bijan, lead back in what's probably going to be an ascendant offense with Michael Penix Jr. And we saw the improvement down the stretch once he replaced Kirk Cousins. Exciting offense, and Bijan is the tip of that spear.
Now, Jake, you do not have a running back here. You're going wide receiver. You said not a ton is going to go in crazy change. I do love this because this was something me and Bogman are actually talking about. This is a big discussion piece of what you do with Puka Nacua. And you say, numero dos as far as wide receivers. He's a 3rd overall player for you. So let's talk about that. I mean, you guys definitely now have established a difference in your wide receiver values as well, but 3rd overall pick for Puka in, that offense with some injuries. What's got you having him there at 3?
So I'm glad you brought up injuries because that's one of the things. If you take the games where he was hurt and then also not running 80% of the routes, and you only take the 80% of the routes games, which is basically weeks 10 through 17, you're talking about 18.6 half-point PPR per game, which, by the way, is second only to Ja'Marr Chase. He's right on his heels, and that's a significant gap to Justin Jefferson now at 3. And that's what it really comes down to. Of course, I'll throw the caveat that if Stafford shocked us in the offseason and was like, hey, I'm walking out, I'm gone. But I think as of today, I think the bigger question is not Stafford. It's Kupp even back with this team? And we've seen the numbers with and without Kupp that you're talking 3 to 4 targets per game, 2 to 3 receptions per game, 3 to 4 fantasy points per game boost with no Cooper Kupp, on top of the fact that all those games I'm referencing with the 80% routes were games with Cooper Kupp. So I think Puka Nacua, similar to the argument Pat was making about Bijan, I think is still on an upward trajectory. I don't think we've seen the best of Nacua. And if I'm going for who can challenge for that number 1 spot, I'm not going to unseat Chase, but I would take Nacua as the second wide receiver off the board and my third pick.
Pat, you don't have Puka there, but I'm just curious, like, do you think Puka is in the tier group of the wide receivers that we're talking about? It's perceivable that, like, you could have 3 different tiers of wide receivers in the first round. You know what I'm saying? Like, Ja'Marr Chase can be his own universe and everyone rotates around him. We're going to talk about number 4 here in a second, but do you think Puka is in this conversation? Even if you don't believe he's a second wide receiver, he's in the conversation of that top tier of wideouts?
Very much so. I have him pretty much in the same tier with Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb. The only reason I have Puka ranked behind those guys is because he has a mildly worrisome injury history. Like in college, he had a broken foot, a high ankle sprain, a hamstring issue, got a concussion at the Senior Bowl during practices, didn't play in the game, and of course the knee sprain early in 2024. Yeah. But Puka's awesome. I mean, there were so many times this season when I would be watching a Rams game and the Rams would have the ball and it would just be so obvious that Puka was the best player on the field, offense or defense. I mean, and Jake mentioned Cooper Kupp. I mean, by the end of the season, Puka Nacua had completely marginalized Cooper Kupp. So, but yeah, like I have thought about what Jake brought up with Matthew Stafford. And if he does decide to hang up the cleats and, like, you know, if they are somehow able to acquire Sam Darnold, then I don't think we move off Puka at all. But what happens if it's a Gardner Minshew type stopgap situation?
What's the lowest then? Because it's very funny that you guys are doing this, because number 4 on the list, we're going to talk about Justin Jefferson. I was going to ask, what are you guys? Is everyone going to freak out if a no quarterback comes in? You know, like everyone was like, JJ McCarthy, he's going to be Jefferson would be amazing. And then it was Sam Darnold. Then when freaked out and started dropping him out of the first round. Is that what's going to happen with Puka? If it takes a little bit of time, Sam Darnold, or not Sam Darnold, but Matthew Stafford's gone and someone else that isn't of Sam Darnold like comes in, where would you move him, Pat? Let's start with you. Would you move him out of the first round, Puka?
Yeah, I mean, I could see a scenario where the quarterback situation was so troublesome that I moved him into the second round. But I mean, it could be Bailey Zappi and I'm not moving him any more than the second round.
And they could keep Jimmy Garoppolo, Jake. I mean, what would you do if it was like a Jimmy Garoppolo type of player?
Garoppolo?
Yeah.
I would go into the same. I thought Pat was going to lean into the Jefferson thing too and say, let's be honest, that was a stupid argument this offseason.
It was.
Because the thing is with Justin Jefferson, we already had evidence of him doing it with what we would call not even a backup worthy quarterback in Nick Mullins, who is potentially not even the backup this week, as they might use Daniel Jones as the backup. Just to tell you what we're talking about here, we already had the evidence of Jefferson doing it with a subpar quarterback. So I'd say Garoppolo would make me keep Nacua in the first round. I would drop him a few spots because I think Garoppolo is replacement level. If we went Nick Mullins further, like those kind of, like, to put that joke aside, the Bailey Zappi, he'd probably fall down to the second, but it wouldn't be enough that I would go much further than that, as Pat said. It would have to be really bottom of the barrel, Aiden O'Connell's of the world, stuff like Tommy DeVito's, and I'd say second round, but it's still because that volume is there. And then what the biggest thing Pat said that I didn't is, it's what we saw at the end of the year. He was so good that if you had never watched football before, you'd be like, man, that guy, that got to be like what, the number 1 wide receiver in the NFL, right? Like, just objectively watching that game, he was that much better.
Yeah, and it's hard to have the argument of being like any wide receiver is quarterback proof, because we were shown that's not the case. Tyreek Hill with Skylar Thompson. Skylar Thompson broke that mold. I'm like, oh, Tyreek Hill, nope. Like, you can have that, but you would imagine the Rams are going to put themselves in a situation where Puka can go. I find it, I guess, hard for him to fall out of the first round, really, no matter what, because I don't think you're going to see a situation where they're left with a Nick Mullins. They probably would be reaching out for a Sam Darnold or, making a solid quarterback choice across the board, probably having that toe in toe with Matthew Stafford, having some type of an agreement where he just doesn't leave the team. Coming in at 4 and 5, agreement time again. We're back to complete agreement. Justin Jefferson, hopefully we don't make an argument if JJ McCarthy is now the quarterback and they get rid of Darnold that he belongs down, and CeeDee Lamb. So both of these guys locked in. You both have them at 4 and 5, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. Jake, give us some takes. Obviously Dak will be back, but the Cowboys are kind of a mess. The Vikings, the only question is, does Sam Darnold return? Because if Sam Darnold returns, we know exactly what we're in for. There's a little bit more of a question with JJ McCarthy, but that was what everybody wanted before. So where do you think the variance is with both of these guys at 4 and 5?
So Justin Jefferson with McCarthy, I don't even know if I would change his rank. Again, I go back to the Nick Mullins. If you can do it with Nick Mullins, and it really comes down to this team as a whole, which is a completely separate NFL topic to have here. But Sam Darnold, let's be honest, we already knew who he was, and bringing the Giants to this, you throw him on the Giants, he's going to be old Sam Darnold again. It's about environment. It's about the weapons around you. It's about the coaching staff. Kevin O'Connell, I would put in the Shanahan conversation and others where you put certain mid-level quarterbacks in there and they're going to be much better because of their environment and their weapons. So I'm not worried about Justin Jefferson if it is McCarthy. I'm of the mindset that they franchise to do one more year, and then we've already had to talk about McCarthy not possibly being ready for week 1. So that remains to be seen, but I put it this way, I'm not moving Jefferson. The CeeDee Lamb one comes down to obviously hoping that Dak Prescott is 100% and CeeDee Lamb are both 100%, because we just came off a year where CeeDee Lamb was in the conversation to be the number 1 wide receiver, and game in and game out, even if they do what a lot of people are projecting them to do in drafting Jeanty, I really don't see it changing from the volume. The biggest thing about CeeDee Lamb is he's one of 3, maybe 4 wide receivers that sits in the 30% target share range. And I don't think that even if they shock the world and sign T. Higgins, I don't really think that's going to change enough where maybe CeeDee Lamb falls a spot or 2. But I think he deserves to be here as long as Dak's okay, which we all expect as of today.
Pat, is there any part of you that, when Dak went down, CeeDee Lamb got kind of destroyed in ranks, and then Cooper Rush figured out, I'll just throw 17 times a game to CeeDee Lamb, every other throw, and that kind of fixed some stuff. But do you think with that type of volatility and how this offense has looked, I know you put him at 5. Do you feel super comfortable with CeeDee Lamb at 5, especially with some of the pieces around him? Because I think if anybody, like CeeDee Lamb showed the volatility of the team, the quarterback, there's health quarterback questions, and what his value became when he lost Dak.
I mean, I do. With Dak back, and then even without Dak, he still produced. Maybe he wasn't quite as efficient. It took more volume, as you mentioned, Welsh. But I still feel comfortable with him, and plus, like, this is not going to be, well, maybe it is if they get Jeanty. Maybe they can start to lean on their running game a little bit more again. But look, the defense is not what it was a couple of years ago. So they're probably not going to be in many like super run friendly game scripts next year. I just feel great about Lamb and the talent. Like he's just proven how good a player he is, just a locked in first rounder.
Number 6, the halfway point here for the first round. This is a difference. So you guys have had half of your picks so far inside of the top 6 be agreements. This is another disagreement. Pat, this is where Puka comes in. So you ended up having, he's wide receiver 4, I suppose that would be. So 2 wide receivers above. And then Jake at 6, you've got Jahmyr Gibbs. So Pat, any other takes you want to throw on Puka Nacua? You did put him below CeeDee, below Jefferson, and below Jamar Chase. So he comes in at wide receiver 4. Anything else you wanted to add on Puka?
No, and no issues with where Jake drafted him or wanted to have him in the first round. Like, for instance, I'm in a home league with a partner, a good friend of mine. Like, if we were deciding between a wide receiver early on in the first round at like 104, and he wanted us to take Puka Nacua over Jefferson or Lamb, like, I don't think I'd argue with him. I'd be okay with drafting Puka.
Jake, you establish yourself as 2 running backs in the top 6 now. So Pat is 2 running backs inside of the top 3. Your second running back comes in, but it is not Bijan Robinson. We've got Jahmyr Gibbs, who's a freaking monster, but does share with another great back. So talk to us about your 6 overall pick, Jahmyr Gibbs.
It really comes down to consistency, and I have no problem, as Pat just said, with my pick. I have no problem with Bijan Robinson. I'm not going to sit here and be like, you're stupid to take him in front of Jahmyr Gibbs. It just comes down to me and looking at Gibbs' season. There was 3 players in all of fantasy that scored double digits every single game. Jahmyr Gibbs and the other 2 were quarterbacks, just to give you an idea of that. That doesn't include Jamar Chase, Saquon Barkley, and the rest. And it really comes down to that was even while splitting with David Montgomery, even while David Montgomery taking away touchdowns. And we all expect David Montgomery's back next year. I just look at Gibbs as I don't see how it can get worse. It might even get better. We saw the end of the season. If Montgomery does miss time, we're talking about he was the number 1 running back over Barkley, even without David Montgomery. So I feel like Gibbs is the second running back is kind of almost like the floor, as crazy as that might sound to say he's the floor is RB2. Maybe it's 3 or 4, but it just comes down to a little bit of consistency versus the fact of there is another option with the Falcons, as we see in Algier, and I don't think he's the threat level to Montgomery, but he's still enough that there's certain weeks where the Falcons just go away, and I just don't know what Penix is going to, and I'm a Penix guy, mind you. I just don't know what Penix is going to look like over an entire season, which for all intents and purposes will be a true rookie season type for him. So it's nitpicky, honestly. And when it comes down to, and this is even if Ben Johnson leaves, like if it's Scotty Montgomery, the assistant head coach, who's a running backs guy, like it might even be slightly better if they go to Mark Brunell, who's the quarterback coach. Maybe he even gets more checkdowns. The point being is I don't think the Ben Johnson's offense, even if he leaves, is going to change much.
And I can't imagine the team, Pat, is going to look to move completely away from the dominant run game that they ran. And that's where the floor starts to exist with Jahmyr Gibbs, is we can say Dave Montgomery, but Jahmyr Gibbs still scored as he did with Dave Montgomery. So now imagine if he's out of there in the upside of where Jahmyr Gibbs is. So I think that's where kind of the land of Jahmyr Gibbs is. And you've got him, jumping ahead just 1 pick. He's comes up here at 7. So 3 running backs inside the top 7. So I know you're probably in pretty firm agreement, but he just doesn't jump Bijan. And there's a little bit of a gap between a couple positions before you tap into Jahmyr Gibbs, Pat.
Yeah, but not much of a gap between Bijan and Gibbs for me either. And to Jake's point about the consistency, I think there was only 1 game all season in half-point PPR where Gibbs did not hit 10 points, at least double digits. And in the 1 miss, he had like 9.3. And that was with David Montgomery up until his injury, averaging 16 touches a game. And then with Montgomery out, of course, Gibbs went completely nuclear and carried a lot of fantasy teams to titles, because I don't think he scored less than like 24 half-point PPR points per game in weeks 15 through 17. So yes, like rock solid floor and sky high ceiling, pretty good combination.
All right, so you guys are like, oh, it's chalk first round. Strap in. Things are about to get crazy on the ranks here. We're going to open this bad boy up. But first, let's talk about 2025. A new you and a new year full of new possibilities. Don't let the bad times of 2024 bring you down. This year, reach new heights with Via. Trusted by over 500,000 happy customers, Via is the Swiss Army knife of wellness, dedicated to harnessing the natural benefits of hemp to create high-quality wellness products. Whether you're looking to improve your sleep, focus, recovery, add a little pep to your step, or just get high, Via has something for you. With products ranging from 0 to 100 milligrams of THC, Via gives you the power to blaze your own trail. They're an industry leader, over 500,000 customers served, and made in the U.S., farmed and crafted with the care in the United States. If you're 21 plus, check out the link to Via in our description and use code FANTASYPROS to receive 15% off. And if you're new to Via, get a free gift of your choice. After your purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. This year, enhance your everyday with Via. Again, 21 plus, check the link, Via, in our description and use code FANTASYPROS to get 15% off, and new customers get a free gift of choice. Enhance your everyday with Via. Now, 7... kind of boring because we've already talked about these guys. You guys both agree there are 3 running backs in the top 7 because Jake, you've got Bijan Robinson at 7. Pat, you've got Jahmyr Gibbs at 8. Now, let's play with this bad boy because this was the discussion that Bogman and I have. And I love this, Pat, because you and Bogman do a show together and you guys can argue till your faces are red. Pat at 8 has Brock Bowers. We have our first iteration of a tight end in a little bit. Jake, you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown at 8. You're boring. That's chalky here. So we don't even need to worry about that. We are going to talk about Brock Bowers in here because I'm going to give you a heads up. Jake, you do not have a tight end. You do not have Brock Bowers in the first round. I will not have Brock Bowers in the first round. Pat, you are first round Brock Bowers, and I get it. Guy just about broke the tight end single season record. There's a little part of me, though, that's like, we've been down this road before, and the recouping of value, there's always kind of that, like, what's the wiggle room of what he has to do to return that value? So I'll shut up. You tell us, top 8 overall pick Brock Bowers in 2025.
Would I really be arguing with Bogman about this? Because I think he's the one guy who's higher on Brock Bowers, or at least was coming into 2024.
The agreement is there. You guys both love Brock Bowers. He's a firm disagree of a first round tight end, though.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So my take is that tight end is always such a problematic position, and Brock Bowers is such a resounding answer to the tight end problem that I do think he warrants first round consideration in much the same way Travis Kelce did all those years when there was kind of a gap between him and the rest of the tight end pack. And I kind of do think there is a gap between Bowers and Trey McBride and company. Like, Bowers is faster than McBride, had a better college career, doesn't have the same touchdown allergy that Trey McBride seems to have. I mean, Brock Bowers, as a rookie with Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew as his quarterbacks, had 112 catches, 1,194 yards, 5 touchdowns. He finished third among all pass catchers in receptions, not just tight ends, receivers too. Only Ja'Marr Chase and Amon-Ra St. Brown had more catches than Brock Bowers. And he did this with a very suboptimal quarterback situation that really can't get any worse for 2025. So, I mean, I don't think this is peak Brock Bowers. I think they're going to be better statistical seasons, which is scary to imagine. So I do think he belongs in the first round.
So I have, I never do tight ends in the first round. So that kind of reeks to me. The bad quarterback play seems like upside, but I can't get out 2 things out of my head. You're going to have a brand new coaching scheme and whatever that could bring. And then I think about guys like Sam Laporta and Kincaid. Sam Laporta was like, oh my gosh, look at this. And then it was just, he disappeared in the offense. Now, it's a very different situation, and that's not a designation, I guess, against Brock Bowers' talent. I just don't think Brock Bowers' talent is in question. It really just kind of becomes about the concern of him being able to produce like top 8 or top 10. Jake, your take on this is where I'm leading up to. Tight end in the first round. Can you do it?
So let me preface this by one of the nicest guys, and I love him. One of the most.
Oh, it's going to be so mean. This is going to be mean. You're going to be mean.
It is. I am 100% coming for Pat and anybody of this take. I will never come to this argument. I will never agree with this argument, but this is my stance. And I know a lot of people actually disagree with me, including I've done Pat Mayo's show for 10 plus years now, and he made the case for Travis Kelce in the first round. The biggest thing, even to compare to Travis Kelce. So twofold, let me take one step back. He wasn't even the highest scoring in points per game this year. George Kittle outscored him a full point per game. So we have 12.2, which is what I'm going to bring up. And I do agree in the fact that we probably haven't seen the best of Bowers. It was his rookie season. And I think Bowers deserves to be in a conversation Laporta even wasn't, where we're talking about, I hate to use the word, but generational tight end prospect. And I'm not even going down the Kyle Pitts route, because Kyle Pitts was an athletic freak. He wasn't a very good receiving option, which is now we're seeing the NFL expose him. So all in agreement of the talent. What it comes down to is you need to have the Travis Kelce 15 and a half points per game to warrant the argument that he's even considered first round. And even then, at 15 and a half points per game, you're still not even a top 7 wide receiver, and we don't have 7 wide receivers in the first round, or maybe we just barely do. And that's where I'm going with all this. If you want to, I mean, I'm not going to call you crazy. I might call you a little drunk, maybe, but it comes down to, I'm not sacrificing running back or wide receiver for somebody who I hope can just get to tight end or wide receiver 6 or 7, which is still barely first round material. Which comes down to the argument you just made, Welsh, is, and if I knew, like, I'll use what something you said earlier, Pat. If you told me they shocked the world and they're the ones that signed Sam Darnold, I mean, be like, okay, you know what? I could get to the 15th, 16th pick. I might get close to the first round, but I'm not running back down that road again with the Raiders to just hope that I get a leg up when that leg up isn't even there right now, and we haven't really seen it since Travis Kelce. So again, I'm just never going to be a tight end in the first round guy.
And it really does skew some there are mock drafts out there already where he has gone in the first round. So like credit due. That's it. Bogman and I did a mock draft, and I took him on the 2-3 wheel. So I actually took him like third pick in the third round, but call it last pick in the second round.
I'm okay with that. 100%.
I know but here's the problem. It's never going to happen. Like there's us, there's some of us. So if you want Brock Bowers, your investment is going to be higher. I think it makes sense for him to be that wheel pick, but he's not going to be. He's going to go higher. And the argument for a lot of people.
And what happens, sorry, I was going to say what happens is if Pat, you're right, and he does hit 15 points per game, he's deserving of the end of the first round pick, sure. But the point is he has to have that leg up. He has to have that 4 point gap on the next best tight end for that to be warranted. If it's only one, if he's right in that same realm, you lose what edge you're trying to gain. And that's my biggest issue with that. If you told me, if Pat said, hey, I'm 2026 Pat, I'm telling you, Jake, he averages 15.5 points per game and the next closest is 12, sign me up for the first time ever. That's the biggest thing.
Pat, would you feel the same way if the Raiders signed Deion Sanders as coach and then Shedeur Sanders is the quarterback they draft, and it's Aiden O'Connell and Shedeur Sanders as the two quarterbacks in Las Vegas? I'm about to say Oakland.
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe a slight upgrade over, O'Connell's still in the picture, and it's Shedeur over Gardner Minshew. So I guess that is a slight upgrade. But that's the thing, like the one thing that could improve him and get him to have that 3 or 4 point gap between him and the next highest tight end is the touchdown total. And like the quarterbacking is going to help with that. Any sort of quarterback improvement is going to get him from 5 touchdowns to 10 or 11, which is kind of where Travis Kelce was in his heyday. So, and look, I mean, I wasn't one of the Travis Kelce in the first round people either. Like I just kind of didn't really enjoy the builds I had when I would do mocks and take a tight end in the first round. So the thing is about the argument with wide receivers, like positional scarcity does matter. And I kind of came around to the Kelce thing by the end of his great run. You can sort of, and I always do take issue with the idea that wide receiver is super deep. It's not as deep as you think, but there are other options if you bypass a wide receiver in the first round or even the second round. Like you can kind of backfill it in rounds 3 through 6 and still come away with a pretty good wide receiver core.
Yeah.
But if tight end gets away from you after a certain point, I mean, you're going to get crushed at the position. And instead of having this guy who, I do think is kind of generational, considering for him to put up these numbers as an early declare rookie, just incredible. And like he was phenomenal at Georgia when he was an 18-year-old freshman, true freshman. Mm-hmm. Like he has been way above the class every step of the way. And I think that's just going to continue. I don't think he's like the Kyle Pitts result is not a possibility in my opinion.
I will say that the gap of like what we used to look at where it was like Kittle and Kelce and Andrew, like that has changed. Like Kelce, I don't want to say wash, but it's just not the same version. Like, Kittle and McBride. It seems like if you're going to make the argument for what is the top tier, it's like Kittle, McBride, and Bowers. And it's like, how close is all of that? So from a positional scarcity standpoint, it makes sense. I can't push that. But don't worry. We get to pick on Jake here in just a minute. We'll do it here.
Hold on.
Oh, yeah. I
want to say one thing. No, because I want to touch on one thing that I think kind of might get glossed over too is Pat brought up builds. And I agree. Like one of the biggest reasons is I don't love my build at tight end. I will say it's not 100%, but I feel for everybody out there that does want to go this route, I would lean into not 0 RB, but I would push further down of let me wait on running back, because the problem is if you take tight end and then you do take running back, now you're almost creating this problem, so to speak, at wide receiver where the bills you're talking about, like the bills that come out, if you do kind of lean into a 0 RB-ish kind of realm when you do take Bowers, your team looks better constructed when you're done because you still have the wide receiver strength, and the drop off that you've already given at running back isn't as great as the drop off you're going to give at wide receiver if you try to play balance after that.
And sometimes like those type of builds give me anxiety, like where you're chasing yourself and you're playing maybe I'm boring sometimes. And that's why I don't do those tight end builds, because I'm always playing from behind at a certain spot. And, like waivers have been great the last couple of years, to be honest with you. You can make some big pickups and, you don't have to, your draft is not won on draft day. You're going to have a pretty good idea once you get a couple weeks in, you've made the right moves and stuff like that. And you do have the position locked up. There's no question about it. There's some inherent risk. 9 and 10, we got a combination of wide receivers. We mentioned Jake's pick at 8 was Amon-Ra St. Brown. Pat, you've got Amon-Ra at 9. Jake, you've got Brian Thomas at 9. At 10, that's where Pat's got Brian Thomas. And then Jake, you've got Malik Neighbors. So this is a really great collection of wide receivers. Amon-Ra seems, he could almost live in like a tier maybe above these guys, but you get just massive amounts of big targets. Brian Thomas was just an absolute destroyer of worlds for all the positive reasons for fantasy. Shout out to Erickson for his 17-1 Brian Thomas bet for this year. So I'm just throwing a couple wide receivers at you. Jake, why don't you give us a couple quick hits or any thoughts? Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, Amon-Ra St. Brown. This is a nice crew of wide receivers we've got here.
It is. And I think some people similar to this year might be happier drafting the back end of the first round than you are at the top because you kind of double down. And then we'll talk about guys that missed and be able to hit one of those that we would think could possibly be first round talents. You're also coming to somebody that you can't see, but I have a Brian Thomas signed football behind me that as soon as he was drafted and as soon as he changed his signature, you can go look online. He has B Thomas 11 when he was in college. And then when he got signed in the NFL and switched it to 7, now it's just BT 7, much cleaner, much nicer looking. But you're coming from somebody who is a Brian Thomas guy to start with, who said that he deserved to be in the conversation with Malik Neighbors. So I don't want people to be like, Jake's coming impartial. I'm kind of coming a little bit rose-colored glasses on Brian Thomas. But similar to some of these arguments we're saying here is we have Trevor Lawrence, who might be playing, he's not obviously playing for his NFL career with the contract he has, but he might be playing for the last shot gasp at hoping he can even be a top 12 quarterback in the NFL next year. There's certain questions of we were all wrong on Trevor Lawrence right now. There's nothing to improve. So a bad year from Trevor Lawrence, then not even Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, Mac freaking Jones. And Brian Thomas is putting up, oh, by the way, the only AFC wide receiver better than him in yards and touchdowns was that Jamar Chase guy, by the way, who should have been in the Pro Bowl, Brian Thomas, not Zay Flowers. I just throw that out as well. Because of that, the numbers he put up, and I think that if we were talking about any other NFL draft, Brian Thomas could have been seen as the best wide receiver in the draft class. He just got hit with a really bad year. So I'm setting that all up to say is I really toyed with not just having Brian Thomas over Nico Collins, Malik Neighbors, and others. I went back and forth and potentially even over Amon-Ra St. Brown. I jokingly said this on the SiriusXM show that I just did earlier today with Dane. And I said, if Ben Johnson ends up with the Jaguars, Brian Thomas was number 1 wide receiver. But tongue in cheek in the fact, I think he would be in the tier with Chase and Jefferson if he had a coordinator that knows how to run that offense and potentially save Lawrence's career.
Pat, what do you think about the idea of Brian Thomas ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown?
Well, my mouth was starting to water about the Ben Johnson, Brian Thomas combination, but I kind of feel like the Jaguars' retention of Trent Baalke might have squashed that dream. I don't think that's going to be the first choice for Ben Johnson, who's pretty much the pick of the litter for head coach candidates. I was fascinated to see that. So I know Jake's a Giants fan, and
No, I haven't been. I haven't been since the second year they drafted Daniel Jones. I said, I'll give him 1 year. Oh, 100%. I have a Texans hat sitting right there. I almost wore it today, but Notre Dame is playing tonight. I legitimately said the year they drafted Daniel Jones, I said, I'm done with this team. I'm so sick of the organization and John Mara. I said, I'll give him 1 year to prove I was wrong about Daniel Jones. And so the next year after that, switched to the Texans before they drafted Stroud because I'm like, nobody likes the Texans and the colors are similar. That's actually why I went to the Texans.
What a good reason.
So I thought I might get pushback on having Thomas ahead of Neighbors, and then Jake's rankings come in, and I see that Jake actually has Brian Thomas ranked ahead of me. But I had the same sort of internal debates about Brian Thomas Jr. versus Nico Collins and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I also thought of putting BTJ ahead of Amon-Ra and decided against it. But to me, that's almost like a coin flip.
Yeah, there might be some fluidity with that in the offseason, it seems like, as well.
Yeah, and Jake mentioned it, another player like Brock Bowers with very suboptimal quarterbacking in 2024, who just thrived despite it, and whose quarterback situation can only get better. So, yeah, I mean, I think he's a slam dunk first rounder. I don't know if everyone's going to see it that way. Like, I think when ADP information comes in, he might be an early second rounder. But another thing that makes my mouth water, the possibility that you could have on the turn the two LSU receivers, if you're sitting on the wheel, like that would be pretty fun.
See, now you're getting us into a whole new territory. All right, we're going to get fun here. We're going to pick on Jake here in just 1 second. But first, we've got a special offer for you all. You can unlock a month of Betting Pros Premium for free. All playoffs. You can have access to the incredible tools that we've got. Download the Betting Pros app today. Use code FPFREE because you can get access to the same game parlay tool, the Prop Bet Analyzer, Prize Picks, Prop Bet Cheat Sheet. Easier to do than to say. So don't miss out. Try it for free. You can get 1 month right now available on iOS or Android, and you unlock all the tools to make your bets, and you can follow, like Pat and myself, you can see what our bets are throughout the week. All right. I jokingly say we're going to pick on Jake. I'm not surprised about this at all because I said, does a rookie belong in the first round? Can you put one? The answer is yes. Coming in at 11, not a rookie for Pat, is Nico Collins. Coming in for Jake at 11 is Ashton Jeanty, the rookie running back. I remember having the Saquon conversations years and years and years ago. We did this, and Jake has kind of come out on top on a decent amount of these. Jake, Jeanty doesn't have a destination, but does it matter? It clearly doesn't. You've got Ashton Jeanty as the 11th overall player, a first-round pick going into 2025. Let's hear it.
It really comes down to, no, it doesn't matter, because I know whoever's going to make that leap is probably walking into 20 touches a game. And similar to Ezekiel Elliott before Saquon Barkley, and then Saquon Barkley, heck, even some of the more recent ones, Bijan Robinson was technically a disappointment as an RB1. He was still an RB1 his rookie season. So I look to all these and I say the obvious easiest one everybody's making is the Cowboys. But what if, like let's be honest, like it's comment almost like joke, tongue in cheek, like, oh, let's just put him on the Cowboys. What if he gets past the Cowboys, he ends up on the Chargers? You're telling me he's not going to be new LaDainian Tomlinson? What if he gets further than that and the Vikings say, you know what, Aaron Jones' contract is no dead money, we'll draft Jeanty and add him to that offense? Like, there are teams, what if the Bengals do it? There are teams in the first round where you're like, oh my God, 300 touches from this guy. And yes, the talent, he deserves to be in the name conversation of rookie Saquon Barkley, rookie Ezekiel Elliott, rookie some of the best we've ever seen. And that's why he's going to be a first round pick. That's why there's talk about him being a top 15 pick. And that's what it all comes down to is I start looking at the running backs we're going to bring up as guys that just missed. And we have workload concerns. We have offense concerns. And I even say on the worst possible offense in the league, put him on the freaking Giants. He'll be Saquon Barkley on the Giants, which is still a top 10 running back. Does he deserve to be first round? No, but I'm assuming it's not going to be that bad is really what it comes down to.
I suppose that my only concern, but this is like going to work against what I'm saying. Like, what if he goes into a situation where he's Bucky Irving to Rachaad White? Well, Bucky ended up taking the role halfway through the year and became, an RB1 and da-da-da. I guess my question always with a lot of these guys, more particularly because we don't know his destination at this point, is what he has to do to return this value. When you're taking him over Josh Jacobs, you're taking him over Jonathan Taylor, you're taking him over Christian McCaffrey. I know there's like obviously concerns there, but you're making some big, bold moves and what he has to return value. Pat, you do not have Jeanty inside your first round here. What do you think the best case scenario can be for him that associates with your rank?
So I've got him in the middle of the second round. And I don't think it would be a tall order for him to return first round value. What does he need to do? 1,600 yards from scrimmage, 10 touchdowns, and he's worth it. That's
you're like kind of shoulder shrug. You're like, oh, what's he got to do? Like, and he's like, I mean, that's pretty tough to do
for Jeanty. And I mean, Jake makes the great point that it's been kind of assumed he's going to Dallas, and that's almost like a worst case scenario for him. And Dallas wouldn't be a bad landing spot for him at all. But like the Chargers or Vikings, like that's delicious. And I mean, he really is that special a prospect. I mean, a guy who shouldered a massive workload at Boise State, just carried the whole offense on his back all season. And his contact balance is so extraordinary, like among the best probably we've ever seen. Like you can just not knock this guy off his feet easily at all. Like it takes more than one tackler or you got to wrap him up. Like he just is impervious to contact. It's obscene.
But let me ask you this then. 15 touches of Jeanty per game. Is he a first rounder, Pat?
15? Probably not. Then he's probably more of a mid-first round or a mid-second rounder, which is where I have him.
And you agree with that, Jake? If he's 15 touches per
Yeah.
game?
So, and I'm glad you put this. So let me put this I'll play my own devil's advocate here. Let's say it does go that route and it is 15 touches a game. Let's say he is Bijan Robinson's first year, which was RB9, which we saw Mostert jump him. I mean, nobody saw Mostert coming, but Derrick Henry was in front of him, others like that. Let's play devil's advocate to say that. What did you really lose from the end of the first round to the middle of the second? Not much. But I think the equitable situation is that just as likely as it is for him to be fringe RB1, there's a world just like Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Ezekiel Elliott, where he finishes RB1 or 2. Like, I think both scenarios are in play. And that's why at the end of the first round, maybe when people look at this and take a step back and say, look at only Jake's running back ranks, like, wow, that's a little crazy to have him as a top 4, top 5 running back. But what's really the big difference between 4 and 7 when you're at this point in the draft? If you don't draft them at the end of the first round, you're not getting them. And that's really what it comes down to. If you want to make the argument for some of those running backs we're going to talk about, fine, cool. But I think there is a ceiling where he's the first or second running back, period, overall.
And you want to be a real psychopath, you could take like Bowers and Jeanty and just your first and second round and just like live that world. We're talking a lot about the guys that just missed it. So let's kind of get to that. The final pick, by the way, at 12 players we have talked about. Pat's got Malik Neighbors. Jake, you've got Nico Collins. That finishes out the first round. If you are doing a scoreboard here, the differences were Jeanty and Bowers. Those were there's like variations of numbers, but those are the two players that one did not have, the other did not have. So the question is, who missed out? You don't have to give me all of the players, but Pat, let's actually start with you on this one. Who missed out that made you uneasy? It could be a couple players. It could be, 1 or 2 or 3, whatever, that you really wanted to get in there. You think maybe are deserved of first rounds, or were there none? Were all these guys just like assured second rounds, but just curious that who just missed your cut?
Mostly a collection of running backs, Welsh. It was Achane, it was Josh Jacobs, it was Derrick Henry, and it was Bucky Irving. Those were the guys. And I think Henry is probably going to be the most glaring omission to a lot of people, but he did just turn 31. I have to admit to being kind of an ageist, and maybe Henry is indeed a different species altogether and is going to keep churning out numbers like this till he's 36. But he's 31 and doesn't really catch passes. Yeah. So I just have a hard time sticking with that archetype as he continues to get a little bit older. And I know I felt the same way coming into this year, and I didn't get Henry on any of my teams, and it sort of burned me. But I'm just kind of going down swinging with that take.
Jake, I guess there's probably a couple players. So I'm curious who missed it and who's the one that really stood out.
For me, Derrick Henry, Kyren Williams, even Bucky Irving, I think could do more. Jonathan Taylor, Achane, I'm just going to throw this one out. This isn't the one that stands out, but I think I'm going to continue to say it. He doesn't need, when we talk about these things, a lot of times too is why we talk ADP is because you don't have to take these guys here. But I'm going to go right back to somebody who had a ton of, and I know health is a major concern, but you know who finished with better points per game than Justin Jefferson? T. Higgins, Cincinnati Bengal. If T. Higgins is back on the Bengals, his production on a per game basis is first round worthy. You don't have to take him there. You can get in the third. That's why I'm actually with the one I'm going to say is not Derrick Henry. I'm going to say the same thing I said last year about Derrick Henry is he's a freak of nature. I'm going to keep doing it until he stops because he's a freak of nature. And his first 2 years weren't real workloads anyway. I wanted to put him in the first round. But the one that I struggled with the most was actually Jonathan Taylor. And it comes down to with or without Anthony Richardson, like Jonathan Taylor, the reason I had him on quite a few teams is because he was projected for my highest carry volume this season. And if you actually parse him out to 17 games, he would have had the most carries in the NFL by a decent margin. This guy was averaging 21 carries per game. The downside is the more of those carries, the bigger games came with Joe Flacco than they did with Anthony Richardson. And I'm not playing that crutch argument of like the Jalen Hurts steals touchdowns, Josh Allen steals touchdowns, because we saw how that worked out this year. Worked out just fine. It comes down to Anthony Richardson just runs more. And then you only get 17 carries from Jonathan Taylor. And I know that sounds like, ooh, wow, I would still take 17 carries from Jonathan Taylor. But you're also, to Pat's argument with Anthony Richardson, not getting the volume in the receiving game that you might get with Joe Flacco or other quarterbacks. So that's why I really wanted to. And Taylor did finish so super strong that he finished as a top 6 running back, but that was weighted heavily by the Joe Flacco days. So I want to put him there. I don't think he can get there because of his environment.
Last question. We can do kind of a quick one. Where does Christian McCaffrey fit in these drafts? You guys had not one single reference. He was the number 1 overall player. It's still the San Francisco 49er offense. Injuries are absolutely scary, and maybe it's going to go down this route, but there was not one mention of him remotely close into what you guys were talking about. So, Jake, let's start with you. Where does Christian McCaffrey fit?
I'm so glad you asked that. We're actually doing most contentious names over The Athletic right now, and one was Christian McCaffrey. Not even first round. The question was Christian McCaffrey, top 10 running back. And I said 100%. Not a question in my mind, because yes, we can play the injury game. We've brought up a lot of players that we talk about the injury game. And yes, there are histories with Nacua, histories with T. Higgins. And we do have a history now with Christian McCaffrey. We've had it before. We just had it 2 years ago for the 2023 season when everybody's like, oh, I don't know if I can do Christian McCaffrey in the first round because look, he keeps getting hurt. If Christian McCaffrey plays 15 games for the 49ers next year, he's going to be a top 5 running back. And that's really what it comes down to. So you don't have to take him in the first round. And I had a feeling you were going to bring him up, which is why I didn't put him in that list. I'd probably have a tough, if I'm on the board, I've only had 4 running backs. I would sit there and consider hard as the 5th running back, Christian McCaffrey, just because who's left from this group who can finish number 1? Nobody but Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, that's kind of my big point, homerism aside. Pat, same thing. Where does Christian McCaffrey truly fit in this for you?
I have him ranked RB9, and I think he's sort of in the back end of the second round. And to me, like, he is an ideal pick. I always think draft strategy should be tailored to how you relate to the other fantasy managers in your league. Like, are you one of the sharks, or are you playing against a bunch of really sharky people, and maybe your strength loves certainty and weakness loves risk? And if you have a lot of really sharky owners in your league who, you know, are obsessed enough to do this for a living, perhaps, maybe it's worth it to take a swing on Christian McCaffrey late in the second round, because if he hits, he's going to hit big. And, you know, obviously we know the risk, but he is a guy who could give you a chance to win your league if you hit on him around the 2-3 turn.
Pat Fitzmaurice and Athletics' own Jake Ciely. Jake, what do you got going on? You were just mentioning you guys were talking about the most contentious names. Anything else?
Yeah, I'm doing my off-season series of looking at projections and their finishes and the wildest outliers, and then the ones that I hit closest on, but what we learned from them, like what are our takeaways, and it's quarterback and then positions from there. So the quarterback next week.
Nice. Well, Jake is a must follow. Pat Fitzmaurice, always. You can find me out there as well. You guys want to have those fun debates, and Fantasy Pros has got you covered. We've already got 2025 ranks out. Dynasty coverage. You want to go over, be a part of the community. Check out the Discord, fantasypros.com/chat, where Pat and Bogman do some of those live shows. We get Worm in there as well. We're doing Dynasty. We've got Discords that turn into podcasts. You can go and check that out for free, fantasypros.com/chat. Even check out the premium, and make sure you're locked in to the website, because we have already got everything set up for 2025 ranks, the NFL draft, and a bunch more. The season is not even over. The smoke hasn't even cleared, and we're already locked into it. So make sure you are as well, and you are subscribed on the YouTube and podcast. Gentlemen, thank you so much for talking 2025. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it as well. And we will talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Podcast here at Fantasy Pros. Until next time, bye-bye, friends.